Hi, everybody. Hard to believe we are entering our final week. I'm sure, like myself, you're all looking forward to some time to decompress. Another great job last week when we discussed labor market discrimination in the professional sports industry. Excellent work once again with the team discussions, where the focus was on whether a taste for discrimination or a statistical discrimination model better described discrimination in pro sports today. Some highlights from the team discussions, where overall statistical discrimination was found to be or thought to be more prevalent. And while not an overwhelming majority, I think most believed coaches and managers were more likely to face discrimination in pro sports today. Something important to note, which kind of kept coming up indirectly, is I think we see the taste for discrimination and statistical discrimination models are hard to completely separate. After all, where do the disparities in statistical averages come from in the statistical discrimination model? Taste discrimination from the past helps reinforce statistical discrimination of today, which, as we discussed, can be self-reinforcing in its own right. Also, you weren't asked about this, but what about owners, general managers? Or, for example, there are no African American owners in the NFL. Okay, Team 1, some highlights there, where statistical discrimination was thought to be more common. Jill brings in some data to support coaches being more likely to face discrimination, where in the NFL, 81% of coaches are white, and 67% of players are black. She also mentions the Rooney Rule, which requires a minority candidate to be interviewed for a head coaching position in the NFL. And a good point was made, really all of the teammates making this point in Team 1, about a coach or owner perhaps being able to justify statistical discrimination because, after all, it's simply based on the statistics. Team 2 also found or thought statistical discrimination was more prevalent. Kevin makes a good point about variation based on positions. And Nate also makes a good point about discrimination often coming from the analysts and reporters. Rachel had a strong comment about taste discrimination perhaps being less prominent, but not for all, referencing discrimination by sex and discrimination encountered by the LGBTQ community. In Team 3, once again, it was thought to be mostly statistical. As Nate from Team 3 pointed out, it's all about winning. Max wins equals max profits, right? Remember, an owner can have a positive discrimination coefficient, but as we saw in the PowerPoint presentation, even an owner with a positive discrimination coefficient could still hire those individuals who they're prejudiced against, just the wrong number of them. So maybe roster limits prevent us from seeing what would be a taste for discrimination. Most of the teammates in Team 3 thought players were more likely to encounter discrimination because there are so many more players. And I get this point, but I'm less sure this is the case when expressed as a percent or a rate. Team 4 leaned towards managers and coaches facing more discrimination. Julian says it's a mix of taste and statistical, and that we probably don't see a lot of the discrimination, particularly the taste discrimination that occurs. I agree with this statement. Brandon says statistical seems more likely today, but he admits he very well could be wrong, which I think is related to Julian's good point about us not seeing a lot of the discrimination in pro sports. Naquan mentions that both forms of discrimination are likely still present. In Team 5, both Stephen and Kyrie made good points about physical attributes other than skin color or sex being factors, such as height, vertical jump, etc. James says it's both coaches and players, obviously, but coaches seem to encounter it at a higher rate and in more dramatic fashion. He gave some good examples not good as good, but strong examples from the NFL. He also asked a great question about picking a player based on a system or scheme via statistical discrimination. I think what's key to recognize here is remember the term statistical discrimination can be a little misleading. A very well-intentioned, non-prejudiced, rational person can statistically discriminate. Sometimes it makes total sense to statistically discriminate. For example, car insurance companies charging teenagers higher premiums than experienced drivers. Team 6 found that statistical discrimination seemed to be more likely, and coaches and managers seem more likely to encounter it. Olivia made the good point about statistical discrimination not necessarily being free from prejudice. I agree with this point. I think that's very relevant and important to keep in mind. Will points out that recent progress for female coaches in Major League Baseball and the National Basketball Association as a good sign, but also mentions how the media can play a role in the discriminatory actions that we witness in the pro sports industry. This week, we will discuss the economics of college sports. We will really just scratch the surface here, but nonetheless, it's an interesting and relevant topic that I at least wanted to introduce. No problem set this week, but there is still a team discussion. The final exam will take place on Tuesday, May 12th. You can take it at any time on the 12th that you would like, but once you open it, you will have 3 hours to complete it and send it back to me. It'll be the same format as Exam 1, but it will be open book and open note. It's non-cumulative. I'll send another announcement later this week about the final. In the meantime, please let me know if you have any questions. Stay well, and I'll see you online.